The rain's already started. Let me tell you a story, no rush, no noise. Just a calm place to rest your thoughts. But before we start, make sure you hit that subscribe button. By the way, what time is it where you are right now? The house with the blue light. It started with the light. A soft, almost watery blue, not bright, not blinking, just steady and low, like something meant to be seen only if you were already moving slowly. I passed it for the first time on a night when I couldn't sleep, walking the long way home after picking up tea I didn't really want, letting the streets empty out around me like a city sighing into itself. The house was at the end of a narrow residential street, half hidden by tall hedges and the kind of fence you can see through, but still feels like a boundary. There was nothing remarkable about it. Really, 2 stories, pale siding, a porch with one of those creaky ceiling fans that turns even when there's no breeze. But in the window facing the street, on the 2nd floor, was that light blue, soft, not quite electric. It wasn't the hue of screens or streetlights. It felt more like the color you see behind your eyes when you press them gently shut. I don't know why I noticed it so sharply. Maybe because everything else was quiet. Maybe because I needed something to notice. I slowed down without meaning to, just enough to take it in, and something about it felt kind. That's the only word I have for it. Not mysterious, not strange, just kind. I walked past and didn't look back, but that gentle blue followed me somehow, resting in the back of my mind like the memory of a melody you only heard once. The next night, I walked that way again, not directly, not obviously, but with enough intention that I knew I wanted to see if it was still there. It was. Same glow, same quiet, same unspoken welcome. And I remember thinking, some places don't call to you loudly, they whisper. And something in me had started listening. It became a kind of ritual not planned, not even daily at first, just something I began to do when the air felt too heavy indoors or when my thoughts started looping louder than I could sort through them. I'd put on my jacket, no matter the weather, and walk without much purpose until my feet led me back to the end of that street, to the house that always seemed to be waiting but never expecting anything. The blue light was always there, always at the same hour, always from the same 2nd floor window, steady and soft, like someone was keeping watch in a very gentle way. I never saw anyone on the porch, never heard movement behind the hedges, but the house didn't feel empty. It felt patient, like whatever lived there knew not to ask questions too soon. I started pausing just a bit longer each time I passed, pretending to tie my shoe or check my phone, though there was never anything urgent on it. Sometimes I'd cross the street and lean against the lamppost, letting the stillness settle over me while pretending not to look directly at the glow. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe nothing. Maybe just permission to feel calm in a way that didn't need to be explained. One night I brought a thermos of tea and sat on the curb across the road just for a minute, just to rest. The light was on, as always, humming a quiet presence into the darkness. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to be anywhere else. The world kept moving, a few cars passed, someone walked a dog, a window slammed 2 houses down, but the moment didn't ask me to do anything with it, just be in it. I think that's when I began to understand what the house was offering. Not answers, not mystery, Just a place where nothing needed to be solved. A pause in the middle of everything. A light that didn't burn for attention, only for presence. It was a Thursday, I think, though the days had started to blend in that soft way they do when you're not rushing through them anymore. When you're just moving from moment to moment, quietly grateful to feel less tangled inside. I hadn't meant to stop for long that night, just a quick pause on my way home, like I'd done so many times before. But when I reached the end of the street and turned the familiar corner, something felt different. The light was still on, still glowing in its calm, unwavering way. But the front door, the one that had always been closed without question, was slightly ajar. Not wide, not beckoning, just enough. As if it had been left that way accidentally, or perhaps on purpose, but with care not to alarm. I stopped mid-step, heart quietly thudding in the way it does when the air around you shifts. There was no sound, no movement, just the open sliver and the blue light above, and the silence between them. I stood there a long time, longer than felt reasonable, and for the first time I felt something close to nervousness, not fear, more like reverence. Like I was near something delicate that had chosen not to remain hidden, and I didn't want to disturb it. I thought of walking up the steps, just to peer through the gap, to see if someone inside needed something, but I stayed where I was, because it didn't feel like a cry for help. It felt more like an invitation to notice, to recognize that something had shifted, and to let that be enough. So I didn't cross the street. I didn't knock. I simply sat on the edge of the curb like I had before, the night air brushing past me, the glow settling over the front porch like it had always belonged there. And I remember thinking, some doors don't open all at once. Some just leave a space wide enough to let you breathe. And maybe that's what I needed most, not to walk in, not to be invited fully, but just to know that something was gently, quietly letting me closer. After that night, I began paying closer attention not just to the house, but to myself. I still walked by in the evenings, sometimes earlier than before, sometimes later, always looking up toward that blue light as if it were a lighthouse, and I, some quiet kind of traveler. The front door stayed closed most nights after that, but I began to notice other small details, the kind that feel like whispers instead of announcements. Once, there was music faint and unfamiliar, maybe a piano, maybe something older, spilling softly from a window left cracked just enough to share without revealing. Another time, there was a cup on the porch railing, as if someone had been sitting there just before I arrived. Not staged, just lived in, real. And for the first time, I began to wonder less about who lived there and more about why it mattered to me, why this house, this glow, this silence, had become something I carried with me, even after I'd turned the corner and gone home. I started noticing things differently in my own apartment, the way light hit the floor at 4 p.m., the sound of the neighbor's television through the wall, the quiet tick of the old clock I'd stopped checking. And something softened in me, not healed, not fixed, just softened. The kind of shift you don't realize until someone asks what's changed and you can't quite say. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I didn't feel the need to name whatever the house was giving me. I just knew it was helping me come back to something, to presence, maybe, to stillness, to that small, steady part of me that had grown too quiet under the noise of everything else. And I remember thinking, sometimes we don't need to understand a thing to be changed by it. We just need to keep showing up. And so I did. It was a Tuesday evening, cool and still, the kind of dusk that softens the world without asking it to sleep yet. I remember walking a little slower that night, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to stretch out the moments between my steps, the way you might sip something warm just a little longer than you need to. When I turned the corner and saw the house again, the same way I always did, same porch, same soft glow in the second floor window, I paused as I always did, letting my eyes linger, letting something quiet settle inside me. And that's when I noticed it. A single folded blanket placed carefully on the porch swing. It wasn't draped like someone had forgotten it. It was arranged intentionally, neatly. Right beside it, on the small table, a white mug empty now, or maybe full of something unseen, and beside that, a book left face down, as if someone had just stepped inside for a moment and would be right back. I stood there for a long time. The house had never looked more lived in, but still no one appeared. No movement behind the curtains, no voice, no footsteps, just that quiet arrangement, like a place set not just for someone, but maybe for me. I crossed the street slowly, unsure what I meant to do, and stood just at the edge of the walkway. I didn't step up, I didn't knock, but I whispered a thank you, low and barely audible, and then turned to leave. As I walked away, I looked back one more time, and though I couldn't explain it, I felt it in my chest, that deep, reassuring pull that said, "You're not imagining this. Someone sees you too." And sometimes, a light left on isn't about mystery. Sometimes it's a way of saying, you're safe to rest here, even if only from across the street. I didn't expect it to follow me, but it did not the light itself, not the house, not anything you could point to, but the feeling of it, the way the hush of that place had started to live somewhere inside me. I found myself moving slower without meaning to, not lazily, just less rushed, like something in me had learned to stop chasing what was already unfolding. I noticed things more. The way light curved along the edge of my kitchen counter in the early morning, the exact sound of my shoes brushing against the gravel path behind the bookstore, the breath someone took before they spoke, the kind of pause that tells you what's coming matters. I didn't talk about the house to anyone, not because it was a secret, but because I didn't want to explain it. I didn't want to put it into words that might shrink it down. Some things feel smaller when we try to make them fit into stories, and this wasn't a story I needed to own. It just was. Still, I started noticing how that stillness changed how I showed up for people. I was more patient in conversations, less eager to fill silences. I listened more, not just to what was said, but to what wasn't. And I think, quietly, the people around me began to feel it too. A friend once said to me, "You've been different lately, like you're standing still even when you're moving." And I smiled, not needing to explain, because I knew where it came from. Not from a revelation, not from a moment of clarity, but from a series of evenings spent near a house that never asked anything of me but presence, a place that didn't speak, didn't open fully, and yet somehow offered a kind of welcome I hadn't realized I needed. And now that welcome lived in me, too quiet, steady, and softly glowing just beneath the surface. It happened Simply no sign, no storm, no reason, just a night like any other, except the light wasn't there. I turned the corner expecting it without even thinking, the way you expect breath to come after the next one, the way you trust that your feet will land where they're meant to. But when I looked up at the house, the second floor window was dark. The porch was empty. No book, no cup, no folded blanket, just a quiet house on a quiet street. Looking back at me with stillness that felt different this time, not cold, not distant, just still. I stood there longer than usual, waiting without meaning to wait, as if the light might flicker on any second and I could exhale again, but it didn't. I didn't feel panic or sadness, just a slow ache, the kind that comes when something you've come to rely on simply pauses. I sat on the curb anyway. I kept the ritual even without the glow. And in that darkness, I realized something I hadn't before. I had never once thought about why the light was there. I'd never asked who turned it on or why, or whether it was meant for me at all. I'd just accepted it, let it soften me, hold me, accompany me, and now, in its absence, I felt its presence even more. Isn't that strange? How something can grow larger the moment it's gone. I looked at the house and whispered a quiet thank you, not expecting to be heard, but needing to say it all the same, not for what the house had done, but for what it had allowed, for the peace it had taught me to find even in moments like this, uncertain, unglowing, unresolved. I stood eventually, tucked my hands into my pockets, and walked away slower than usual, carrying a stillness that didn't need the light anymore to stay with me. Some things, I realized, keep shining long after they've gone dim, not as memory, but as part of who you've become. I still walk by sometimes, not every night anymore, and not with the same ache in my chest I carried the first time the window stayed dark just now and then, when the air feels soft and the streets are hushed, when I find myself reaching for that quiet I used to know without meaning to. The house is the same. The hedges still sway when the wind moves through them. The porch fan still turns with that lazy, perpetual rhythm, and the second floor window still looks out over the street like a half-closed eye. But the blue light hasn't returned, and oddly, that no longer feels like loss. It feels like a season that passed through me gentle, essential, and done. I don't know who lived there. I don't know why the light stopped or why it began in the first place. But the truth is, I don't need to. What matters is what it gave, not answers, but rhythm, stillness, space to come home to myself without needing to explain why I needed it. And that, I think, is the quiet gift of some places. They don't try to fix you. They don't even ask you to speak. They simply let you be close until one day you realize you're not waiting for them anymore. You're just carrying what they gave you, softly and without ceremony. Sometimes, when I sit in my own apartment late at night, I turn off the overheads and leave on just one lamp, a soft blue one I found at a flea market without meaning to, the same shade that once lit a stranger's window. I don't know if it looks the same from outside. I don't know if anyone notices, but I like to think someone might. That maybe one night, someone walking home with too many thoughts will glance up and feel something settle in them just for a moment. And they won't need to know why. Only that, for a little while, there's a light left on, and it doesn't ask for anything. It just says, you're safe to rest, you're not alone, you're already home.